from a marketing point of view as a podcaster, having the video is really, really important. And that's perhaps the biggest game changer. Why not just do a 15-minute one of just you talking about your expertise? That might separate you out a wee bit from the market that you're trying to get into. Podcasts are principally an audio delivery mechanism. It has to sound good. And if you're going to use clips from that recording, the clips have to sound good.
Welcome back to another episode of Smarter Podcasting with me, your host, Neil Mackay, the podcast guy. I started my first podcast in 2019, but I actually started listening way back in the 2000s before my guest today even made his first podcast. I've been a podcast fanatic since they came out, all the way through past the serial phenomenon of 2014, all the way up to now 2025. I listen to podcasts all day, every day. And from that passion, I started 7 Million Bikes Podcast, where we now help people around the world. So we've helped with hundreds of podcasts, thousands of episodes, millions of downloads, and help podcasts get to the top of the podcast charts. If you want to work with me and you want to work with 7 Million Bikes Podcast, then remember, get in touch, go to 7millionbikes.com. There is a button there that says talk to Neil, and you can book a call directly with me, and I will be happy to share how we can help you and help you save all that time and frustration it takes to make a podcast. Now, in this show, Smarter Podcasting, I take everything I've learned, all my knowledge, my tips, my tricks, my failures, and share them with you to help you make the best podcast possible. And not only that, I talk to some of the biggest and best people in the podcasting industry to share their advice with you as well. So my guest today is actually from the town next to me, which I didn't realize until we just met before the call. He's from a place called Kirkintilloch, and I'm from Bishopbriggs. And I haven't lived in Scotland for about 20 years now. So you, as a listener, may have noticed that my accent is a little bit softer. I get commented on that all the time. I'll warn you, his is not. It's a traditional Glaswegian accent, but you're probably going to hear me slip into my true Scottish Glaswegian accent a few times in this episode. It's really difficult when you're speaking to another Scottish person to not do it. I think I heard it there already, just slip out a little bit. But my guest today, he is not only from Scotland, he is a true UK podcast pioneer. He started podcasting way back in 2005 and was the first ever podcaster in Scotland. How amazing is that? And he is also the co-founder of the podcast studio Glasgow. So today we're going to share with you what makes a show stand out in today's saturated market. We could not be talking to anyone better about that. My guest today is Mark Hunter. Mark, thank you for joining me on Smarter Podcasting.
Pleasure, Neil. Good to speak to you.
How long is it going to take until I go full Scottish? That's the question.
Well, I mean, it was only when you were doing your intro there that I noticed that you weren't going full Scottish. So I think immediately when you and I started talking before the recording, you were in full Scottish.
Am I putting on my radio voice now already?
Listen, I'm not going to draw attention to it.
So you are, I call myself an OG podcaster because I started in 2019. You are the OG of OG podcasters. Tell me what podcasting was like way back in the early 2000s.
You know, before the call, I was thinking about that, and it's, a lot of it's similar. It's the kind of grassroots movement where anyone can get a microphone, these days also some sort of camera, and they can have their voice and their visuals on the internet talking about whatever it is that they're passionate about, So it could be collecting beer mats, or it could be promoting their business. And back then, sort of 2004, 2005, that was pretty much exactly the same. It was my first podcast was promoting unsigned Scottish bands. I'm a music lover. I wanted to play music that I enjoyed and let other people hear it. And I think fundamentally, if you take away the big corporations that are using podcasts, the grassroots democratization of the quote-unquote airways is what it was about back then. And I think there's still an element of that about today.
Absolutely love that, because it is what makes podcasting so special. You can get a microphone, you got a camera on your phone now these days, which didn't have really even 5 years ago. It wasn't that easy to do. Microphones are so much cheaper, so much easier. USB microphones weren't really much of a thing when I first started, even in 2019. So anyone can spend less than £100, £100, get a decent microphone and just share what they're passionate about and share it with people, which I think I take it for granted because it's so easy to do now. But even 5-10 years ago, that was not easy to do.
Oh, no, I mean, 2004 and 2005 when the technology first came about, you could get, in fact, my first microphone was one of those cheap sort of swan neck ones from PC World that would plug directly into the mic jack on your PC tower. So the microphone side of it wasn't too complex, but video, forget it. The video component to podcasts just was not a thing back then at all. And I remember being asked in an interview, maybe 2006 or 2007, why do you think there's no video? Or do you think video will become a part of podcasting? And I have to put my hands up and I said, absolutely not. And I gave 2 reasons. One of them, I said, most podcasters probably don't want to be seen on video. There's a reason why they're using audio. So that whole thing, you have a face for radio, And the second thing was the technology. Basically the technology and the internet bandwidth didn't exist. I didn't foresee a time where smartphones with 4K cameras would allow you to stream directly onto the internet. So the technology's changed, and I think fundamentally the audio component of podcasts is still what people are interested in. They want to put those AirPods in when they're going to the gym, when they're out walking the dog. They want to listen to a podcast on a long commute. And they're not really interested in the video. But from a marketing point of view as a podcaster, having the video is really, really important. And that's perhaps the biggest game changer when it comes to the delivery mechanism of podcasts is the video component.
It is interesting you said you didn't see it happening. I'd call myself like an OG podcaster because I love the audio medium. Like for me, podcasting is audio, and I used to fight it when I saw people online talk about a video podcasting or a video and they would call it a podcast and I'd be like, no, it's not a podcast. Now I gave up on that a few years ago because it just is, right? It is what it is. And even now as a business, I get confused sometimes when people say they want to start a podcast. Even recently, we had someone in the studio. They said they were doing a podcast. They came here, recorded it. And then afterwards, their first episode, we were chatting. And I said, well, who's going to be your host? Like Buzzsprout or, Captivate, Spotify for podcasters? He's like, what are you talking about? And I said, how are you going to get it on? You're going to get it on Spotify, Apple Podcasts? And he's like, oh, no, we're just going to have it on YouTube. And I was like, just hanged my head. I was like, oh, God.
Yeah, I mean, our biggest podcast client only puts his content on YouTube. And I say biggest, in terms of the numbers, the viewers he's got. It's a huge show. It's one of those viral Scottish shows now. And we've been saying to him, you need to get it on Spotify, you need to get it on Apple Podcasts. And he's like, nah, YouTube's fine. So, yeah, but, I was reading something
Makes
recently.
sense as well because the monetization is there and stuff. And yeah.
Exactly. And I think talking about monetization, YouTube's a simple way. It's fairly painless to get in a small amount of revenue from a YouTube channel. But advertisers that are wanting to buy ad space on podcasts, traditional podcasts, they're kind of struggling to understand what a podcast is. This is something that's been reported again and again because they're going, right, what is a podcast? Is it an audio thing that's available on Spotify or is it a video on YouTube? So as you said, there's the blurring of the lines, and when you're an expert in the field, you kind of need to just give up and go, that's whatever you want it to be, mate.
Well, apparently now it's almost been defined as anything with a microphone because the younger generation, Gen Z, and I don't want to malign Gen Z or anything, just that generation, if they see somebody on TikTok talking into a microphone, they would call that a podcast. And that you just have to change the way you think about things because things have changed so much.
Yeah. It's a bit like my dad, who's 82. Whenever he sees anything on YouTube, he now says, yeah, it was on the telly. So the mediums and the delivery mechanisms of mediums change and shift over time. And I think as a result, the definitions of the medium changes over time as well.
The amount of times in the past when someone's asked me what's a podcast, and I'm like, well, it's just like the radio. I would say it's the radio on the internet. It's a radio you can listen to at any time. But now that doesn't even really make sense. It's more like it's the TV. You can listen to it, watch it anytime, but that's Netflix. So, and now Netflix are hosting podcasts. Anyway, so let's get into today's topic because I'm genuinely really excited to hear about this because one thing, you started in 2005 and even other people I've spoken to even 10 years ago, it was Joni Deutsch from Podglomerate, and she was saying, before it was relatively simple to, get a decent amount of viewers, stand out. One of the things that frustrates me the most and really frustrates me is when people say there are too many podcasts. And my first thing is there's about 250,000 new episodes a week. There's about 1 billion blog posts a week. There's new TV every day on Netflix. I've never heard anyone say there's too much Netflix, there's too much TV out there. You got Netflix, Paramount, Hulu, Amazon Prime. It goes on and on and on, right? Disney Plus. Nobody ever says there's too much TV, but for some reason people say there's too many podcasts. I don't really get it. There's definitely not. But I do understand it would have been easier to stand out because there were less podcasts. Now there's more. When you started, what was it like? How easy was it to stand out?
Personally speaking, it was easy for me to stand out because I'm Scottish. So the market back then was really, really small because the technology was brand new and a lot harder to understand. There was no smartphones with, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or an app store where you could download a podcast aggregator. That did not exist. So it was a little bit more technical for your listeners to engage with you. But the number of available podcasts was really really small. It was probably in the 4 or 5 figures globally back when I started. But the thing that set me apart was the fact that I'm Scottish. So it turns out, for whatever reason, people in other parts of the world love the Scottish accent, and that's maybe something you've experienced in your professional and personal life once you've left Scotland. So that was, so yeah, that was fairly easy for me to differentiate myself in the marketplace. Obviously now there's, you just said 250,000 podcast episodes published. Was that a week, did you say?
Yeah, a week. I think it's a little bit more now, but yeah, roughly.
And I think the number of active podcasts that are still publishing is definitely 7 figures, I'm sure. It's in the millions globally.
It's not much.
And I was thinking about this question, how do you stand out in a crowded marketplace? And I think for me, if I was advising somebody, I would be getting them to look at the type of podcasts they want to emulate, right? So is it the interview-based one like the one that we're doing just now? Is it a panel type thing where it's 2 or 3 people discussing a topic? And I would suggest, and this is maybe my Glaswegian contrariness, but I would suggest do the opposite. So if the market you're wanting to go into, let's say it's business podcasts, and we produce a lot of business podcasts in our studio, they're all guest-based, and there's absolutely a market for that. It's a fantastic vehicle. But I think, and we've just done this in-house with our own in-house podcast, I think move away from the guest-based one and go solo. Not necessarily every episode, but just go solo. So rather than having a kind of 35, 40, 1 hour long podcast where it's an interview, why not just do a 15-minute one of just you, the business owner, the business expert, talking about your expertise, identifying a common client pain point, and then for 15 minutes, giving some free advice on how potential clients can go over that pain point. That might separate you out a wee bit from the market that you're trying to get into. Now, again, that might just be my Glaswegian contrariness. Well, everybody's doing this, I'm going to do the opposite. But I think there might be some mileage in it. If everyone's doing one thing, can you try something a wee bit different?
I don't know if you can see my face just lighting up because I actually recorded, not long before we came on, my own solo episode, which will be out the week before this episode. And there was about 15 minutes of me sharing how I just got a sponsor through using TikTok. And I kind of share about how what you mentioned, it's the audio podcast is the main thing, but we post these clips on TikTok and Instagram and Facebook and all of that stuff. And one of those clips, or many of those clips, led to us actually securing a sponsor for the podcast. And I don't think the company had ever heard the podcast. They were just interested in really sponsoring those short clips. But I'm the same as you. And I don't know, do you follow Adam Shibley from the Podcasting Business School? Because you've come to the same conclusion. He coaches you on that. I mean, I've not done his coaching, but I follow all his emails. Do you really need to do solo episodes to really showcase your expertise? And it is interesting because I'm doing an interview podcast right now and I do them. but I'm sick of them as well as a listener. Like I personally there's no interview podcast that I personally listen to. I listen to the Noiser Network, which is like a documentary podcast. I'll listen to true crime, you could call it, investigative journalism podcast, things like this, things that are really well made. If it's just, it doesn't matter if it's a celebrity or anything, if they're just two people talking, I will not listen to it. And it's one of the things I try and do a bit different with smarter podcasting is each episode, there's not much fluff in the beginning, hopefully not too much in this, that we get into the topic and there's one really key piece of value for every listener, every episode, so they know what they're going to come away with. Or it's a solo episode where I'm going to tell you directly some key information. So the fact that you think that that's some way to stand out, it's one of these things as well. I never know if what I'm saying is accurate, really. But I love it when I hear other people tell me, yeah, I think what you're doing is right.
Yeah. It's funny, the guest format, you know, and as I said, there's mileage in it. There's definitely mileage in it. So I'm not saying never do the guest model. But if you think about it practically, particularly if your podcast, you want to use it as a vehicle for your business expertise. Let's say you've got a 45-minute guest-based podcast for your business. Probably more than 30 minutes of that recording time is your guest talking about their expertise. And the rest of the time is you maybe just asking questions, maybe a wee bit of intro, a wee bit of outro. So I get it from the entertainment point of view, that whole concept of edutainment. So podcasts should be a form of edutainment where people are entertained, but they're also educated. I think what you've just said, you know, if you're going to put out solo episodes, what did somebody call it? I heard the minisodes. Someone called them minisodes. So you've got the full length episodes, which might be sort of 45 minutes, an hour, but then you intersperse some minisodes in between. And that's just you, the business owner or the expert in the particular field. And I think that could become the glue for a good podcast marketing strategy. You've got the big building blocks, right, which are the big guest episodes. But the glue that can hold it all together could be those minisodes where it's just you speaking for 10, 15 minutes. What I've noticed is people buy into voices. So, as I said earlier, when I first started podcasting, it was my Scottish voice that people bought into. I think people still buy into voices. If we've got a warm, friendly, authoritative voice, or we inject a little bit of humour in, whatever it may be, people have got that going into their ears for 10, 15, 20 minutes. If you're doing that regularly,
100%.
People start to feel they know you, they can trust you.
Well, I just mentioned the Noiser Network, which they just make all my favorite podcasts. They just did the Titanic Ship of Dreams podcast, which is, I listened to it twice. I've never listened to a documentary podcast or maybe a little bit investigative because they were uncovering things. But it's Paul McGann is the narrator for that, which you probably know, like the actor, and he comes from that famous British acting family. And then there's on the same network, on the Noiser Network, other similar podcasts, there's a guy called John Hopkins. I've no idea who he is. I don't know his background, what he looks like. But it just ties into what you're saying about the voice. His voice, he just has this amazing, warm voice that I love listening to, which does make me come back to the Noiser Network. And I normally very much listen to the podcast I tune into. But this one, there is sometimes it can be a little bit of background noise because I like his voice so much. So yeah, you're 100%. But one of the things you mentioned a little bit there was about having a podcast for your business. So this kind of, I was going to say meshes, the opposite of meshes, jars a bit with, I think people like me and you who are really passionate about the medium of podcasting, we absolutely love it. And that's kind of what lends itself to the interview format. You're going to talk to somebody. And I think it started off just talking to your mate, which some people still do. I don't recommend doing that, and just having a bit of a chat about something. And you can still do that if that's what you want. And some people might listen. That's fine. Not what I would recommend you do, but I think it leads to that format. But you were talking about, and what I do as well, these solo podcasts to glue it together as the business owner. So how do we go from podcasting for fun, for passion, to people like me and you who really promote it as a business tool?
Really good question, and that's the holy grail. You know, that's what everyone who's ever sat in front of a microphone, pressed record, and then published it via an RSS feed wants to know. Can I make revenue? Can I make some money? from doing this. That's back in 2005, by the end of 2005, guys like Adam Curry, who was one of the co-founders of the technology behind podcasting. He's a former MTV VJ. He'd launched a company to help podcasters monetize their podcast. So the whole thing was, you can give up your day job and podcast full time and make money. 20 years later, we realise that's probably not viable for very many people unless you get incredibly lucky and someone like Barstool comes along and offers you a chunk of money, or someone like Spotify buys the rights to your podcast. It's unlikely to happen. So as a business tool, I think the way that we can make money from it is as a lead generation engine. So that's putting our voice out there, our expertise out there, putting the clips from our podcast on our socials. So we're thinking LinkedIn, Instagram Reels, maybe TikTok, depending on the type of business, YouTube Shorts, if the clip is under a minute, and just keep pumping that content out. Now, what we've seen, speaking internally in the studio, is we're always trying to get new clients. When we follow our own advice and publish the short form content, we put the solo episodes out, that's when we start to get inquiries. That's when people visit our website, send a booking request, etc. So monetizing the podcast. You've learned that the way you monetize your podcast is to sell your expertise, because you now sell your expertise as a podcast producer.
And even, those short videos, which we can get into a bit more detail in a second, but I mentioned I've just done an episode about how a TikTok video has led to us getting a sponsor. It's created $600 in revenue for 4 episodes, which, as I said in the episode, I'm not going to be about to become a full-time podcaster for Discover Vietnam and quit the podcast business, but it's a nice bit of money to have, and it came from a TikTok video. And I just remembered as well, early on when we opened the studio, we got one of our first clients because I had made an episode of my podcast in the studio, and he saw a short clip of that on TikTok. I've only just remembered that, and got in touch with me because he's like, hey, I saw that you recorded this in Saigon. I need someone to record blah, blah, blah. And it was only one small client from it, but we got business from that. So the short videos do make a massive, massive difference. But I want to go back to talking more about standing out in this crowded market, because I'm really thinking about the person listening right now who's just started their podcast. They're quite new. And I think what the reason I'm bringing it back up is because it ties in with monetization. I think everything does. The thing we're trying to share with people is, how can you stand out in a crowded market? But ultimately, the reason that you want to stand out in a crowded market is because you want more listens, you want more views, and that leads to a bigger chance of sponsorship and monetization, which is ultimately, that's the main goal for a lot of people. We can sit here and beat around the bush and say, oh, how do I stand out in a crowded market? But ultimately, what you're saying is, how can I get sponsorship? How can I get monetization? Now, we talked about a couple of different things. For you, somebody starting a podcast, what would you say is the best way for them to stand out and for them to get monetization? Because we've talked about using it for your business. What if they don't have a business, or how could they tie that into their business?
The hobbyists, let's just call them hobbyists, the people that are starting podcasting as a hobby, as a passion project, and they think, I'd like to one day attract sponsorship like you've been able to do. Some business sees a bit of content from my podcast and thinks, great, we want to associate with that. The first thing to consider is, how does it sound and how does it look? So if you're including the video component, you need to think about how it looks. But let's go back to the first one. How does it sound? Because podcasts are principally an audio delivery mechanism, it has to sound good. And if you're going to use clips from that recording, the clips have to sound good. So I see some awful microphone setups, some people who have maybe spent a bit of money and bought the wrong type of microphone, and then they're recording in an environment where the microphone might aesthetically look nice, but it doesn't sound good. So do your research, seek some expert help. So look up professional podcast producers or advisors or consultants wherever you live, and get some help choosing the right equipment and the right hardware, because it has to sound good. And then obviously it has to look
that.
good.
I have to jump in. Let me jump in on that one before you go into then going to look good. I absolutely love that for a few reasons. One, just the most basic things sound good. Like, it seems so simple, but if you don't sound good, if you do want to stand out and you ultimately want to get sponsorship, you want to you want brands to work with you. You want some brand to come and say, hey, we want to give you some money. We want to be associated with you. You have to sound good. If you don't sound good, and that is like rule 101. It's not just like, oh, I'm trying to be a purist. You should sound good. And nothing frustrates me more when someone says they want it to sound natural, which means garbage half the time. And I love what you're saying as well. Learn how to use your mic. It's the biggest thing I do with people when I coach them. The mic placement thing, I can see yours is obviously placed well. You're a professional. Mine is placed well as well. And sometimes it's just the most simplest thing. I remember one of the first audits that I ever did. And she was like, oh, I'm just really trying to get my sound good. And I had her on a video call and I said, where's your microphone? And it was like up here. And on the video, it kind of looked like it was in the camera and you could see it. But I was like, how far away is it from your mouth? And it was miles away. And I was like, okay, just pull it close to your mouth. How does that sound now? And she's like, oh my God, that sounds amazing. I've been struggling with this for weeks. And I was like, it's literally just put it in front of your mouth. So I do love that. It is just the most simplest thing. Just make your sound good before anything else.
And it's hard to excuse it, really. Obviously, you dealt with a client there, but I mean, a simple YouTube search even, I have this microphone. How do I make it look good? There'll be a video tutorial, and I'm sure you and I could get super geeky and super technical, but it's understanding the difference between a dynamic mic and a condenser mic, and understanding what proximity is. So I've got my mic quite close to me, and if I move even closer, it sounds great. So, but the sounding good part, and I want to stand out in a crowded marketplace. Great. If that marketplace is already crowded with podcasts that sound great, you're going to have to start at that level. You're going to have to start with a podcast that sounds great. Book a professional studio if need be. If your goal is, right, I want to take this seriously. I want to try and maybe get a bit of revenue from this, from brand deals, some brand partnerships. Book a studio, because they'll take care of all of that side. I mean, obviously, you and I, that's, what we're doing. We want clients, but there's a reason for that. A client can walk into a professional studio, sit down, record. They don't need to worry about whether it's going to look and sound good. It will. But then if you want, I can move on to the looking good. And I feel there's kind of maybe 3 components to that.
Let me just jump in again. I've got 2 things I want to add to that, and then we'll jump into that. All right, let me go. There's just 2 things I want to add to that really, really quickly. One is talking about get a podcast coach or a consultant. It's actually really funny you brought that up, because it was just last night somebody on Reddit posted something on our podcasting about a podcast coach, or what is a podcast coach. Can't remember, something like that. And man, some of the comments, and I know it's Reddit and I know some people are just clueless. Some of the comments were like, if anyone calls themselves a podcast coach, I run the other way. There's no such thing as a podcast coach, blah, blah, blah. Not all of them, but most of them were kind of like, I just commented like, I don't call myself a podcast coach, but I've coached people on podcasting, and I could if I wanted to. I do offer consulting. I do not understand all the negativity towards a podcast coach. If whatever industry you're in, you'll be able to find a coach in that industry, which is normally somebody who's done it, has the knowledge. Like, yeah, of course, there might be somebody who's made one podcast for 6 months and calls himself a coach, but that's on you to look into their background, get their CV. I was just completely confused. So you talked about getting a coach or a consultant. Completely agree. One thing I want to add as well, talking about that, the quality and the difference that it makes in standing out. And just to give you a really good example, so we do shorts when we've been doing shorts for a long time. And I'm one of those people, like, I'll just get things done. It doesn't have to be perfect. And I now look back on some of my first videos I made, and they were just garbage, like so bad lighting, terrible camera. I had like a 720p webcam. But I knew in my mind, like, if I waited until I could afford the equipment, if I waited to get the equipment that I needed, it would be too long. It would take me forever to do it, and I would miss out on all those lessons. So I just got started. And then even before I got the studio, which was just a few months ago, I was recording episodes at home, and I had a couple of big lights, and I turned them on, and I thought it looked amazing. We were so well lit. We were bright, and it was better than before, right? But I was still recording on my iPhone, 4K, like you mentioned. I'm like, 4K, it's amazing. It doesn't matter. It's so good. 4K, oh my God. Then we moved into the studio, and oh my God, what a difference. Now I'm learning about contrast and The camera is just a depth of field. I'm like, oh my God. So now when I look back at some of those videos, which were better than before, the light is so flat. There's no contrast. There's no texture. It's just bright white lights on our faces. The camera, yeah, it's an iPhone 4K. It looks good. The colors are good, but it's so flat. There's no depth of field or anything like that. But my point is, I can see on TikTok and on Instagram that our views went up massively. We got that sponsorship after we moved into the studio because the numbers went up. And I have no idea how all these algorithms and stuff work, but I assume the algorithm can scan your content and immediately be like, this is good quality. I'm sure they can, because the numbers went up massively as soon as we went in. And I think about any kind of podcast content that I see on Instagram or anywhere, it's all professionally recorded in a studio. You never just see two guys on a phone with a ring light.
Yeah, I would say for the podcast content, no, you're totally right. That's not the kind of content. Well, I'm sure that content exists, but it's maybe not the sort of content that's going to get traction, get viewers, which in turn is going to help you attract sponsorship, because their sponsors are looking at, wait a minute, are people watching this content? And I think as humans, our eyes have been trained through social media to immediately resonate with good aesthetics. So if a clip from a podcast aesthetically looks good, like you said, where you've got the contrast lighting, there's a hair light and there's practical lighting, and people don't know what these terms mean. That's when you speak to an expert, or you go and do the homework to learn what these terms mean, because they matter when you're setting up your visuals. But from an aesthetic point of view, you think of your habits when you're scrolling through TikTok or Instagram Reels. If it's a podcast clip and right away, oh, it doesn't sound great, oh, it doesn't look great, you're just automatically going to move to the next bit of content. So, yeah, the visuals, and, we can go back to being a purist when it comes to podcasts. Podcasts are audio delivered by RSS, but we've had to adapt our puritanical views and include video. So a video podcast has to look good. It's like you said, the depth of field, what sort of lens is on the camera, where is the camera positioned, and the lighting. Basically, when it comes to photography and videography, two things really matter. One is the lens, the other is the light. So the shot for your podcast has to be lit well, even if it's a solo. And a ring light can be fine. Here's a tip. Take the ring light, move it 45 degrees to the side, 45 degrees angle towards you. Suddenly, you're not going to have this flat, washed out look. You're going to have contrast. So it's wee things like that that will make your podcast look better, look more professional. And we can't emphasise it enough, Neil. It has to sound professional.
I'm just nearly wetting myself laughing here because I'm in my studio, but I'm not using any of my equipment. So I'm on my iPhone right now. I have a ring light, but it is 45 degrees to the right of me. So it should have a bit
I can see it.
Contrast. And then when I first started, I literally would have the ring light in front of me and my face would just be bright white. I do have a good microphone. I do have a dynamic microphone. So that's my saving grace. I'm embarrassed actually looking at your background. I'm like, shit, why did I not just set up in the studio? But it is a little bit of extra work, and I'm working in the.
I'm not showing off.
Office.
I could have been placed in my office, but it's an office and it's a busy office, and it wouldn't have looked good. And it's just easier for me to step into the smaller of the two studios that we have. It's already set up. If I don't use it, I feel it would just be wrong not to use it.
I feel like we're going to have to redo this, and I'm going to have to get in the studio. We'll have to do a second episode. That's what it's going to be. And the next time I'll be in the studio. But so that's so true though. So do you think that you need to do video to stand out?
It's undoubtedly necessary now. There is no doubt, no question. Yeah, do you know what?
I wasn't sure what you were going to say there, to be honest.
No, I have to be pragmatic. For all I'm a purist, I have to be pragmatic. The video, so our in-house podcast, when we have a guest, we record the video. The video's just of the guest, and we'll put clips out of the guest speaking. I'm not in the video, it's just the guest, and we don't release the full video. So that's something that people maybe want to keep in mind. Maybe they don't want to have a 1 hour long podcast of them speaking to somebody on YouTube. That's fine. Just record the guest. and put clips of the guest out, because without the video content to go along with your podcast, my question would be, how do you intend to market the podcast in almost 2026 as we're now moving into? Video is the primary marketing tool for everything these days, and that includes our podcast. So our podcast can be like our in-house podcast, audio based, but you need video to market the podcast. It's just the way you have to do it now.
Unfortunately, that is true. So Mark, thank you so much for this. This has been absolutely incredible. It's very rare that I say to someone, I'm going to have them back on, but I'm going to have you back on. Mostly just because I want to show myself in a better light and do it in my own studio, which is just right next to me, and get out of the office. But thank you so much. I hope you've enjoyed this as well. I hope you've taken so much from this, just like I have. It's really reaffirmed some of the things I already thought, I already think I knew, but it really, really is true. If you do want to stand out, you do have to do video. Make it sound good. Simple things like a good microphone. And, you know, I do audits of podcasts. I've done one recently. The sound wasn't great. I told them that in the audit. I was like, you know, you've got to make it sound better if you want to stand out. And the podcast concept was great, but I was like, your audio has to sound good right off the bat, even before you do video and anything like that. And I would say, just like I did as well, if you're worried about the cost and the technical skills and all of this, just get started. Just do it. Get your phone, get a 720p camera, start learning, do it. But if you do want to talk to an expert and somebody who has learned the ropes, who has made all the mistakes, like I just told you, all the mistakes I've made, if you want to talk to me, then book a call with me. Go to 7millionbikes.com. I will be happy to have a discovery call with you and see how we can help your podcast. And it honestly will just save you so much time and frustration to work with someone like myself. So don't forget, rate, review, subscribe, follow to the podcast, turn on notifications. It's something I didn't used to do, but it really does help. You get that little push notification when a new episode comes out. There is a new episode every Monday with Smarter Podcast. And the best thing that you can do for me is share this episode with somebody else who needs to know this information, who wants to make the best podcast possible. Mark, thank you so much. All the best with Podcast Studio Glasgow. Next time I'm back in Glasgow, we are definitely meeting up for a beer and I'm coming to check out your studio.
My pleasure. It was good to speak to you.
Cheers.